Imagine yourself under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights. Creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands, here are your hosts, Sarenth Odinson, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate. Discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire?
Oh, the inner fire, the ever-burning, the ever-turning, the ever-moving self. Hail to the inner, hail to the outer, hail to the burning flame which touches betwixt and between. Oh, blessed inner fire, gifted from the gods, fueled, fueled, fueled by emotion, by fury, by might, fueled, fueled, fueled by food and delight and love, fueled, fueled, fueled by beauty and bitterness and boldness. Hail to the inner flame, may I tend you well. Hail to the inner flame, may I never hood you. Hail to the inner flame, may you always be well fed, well cared for, well tended. May your fire reach other fires. May you set them alight. May you delight in their dance. May you bring back wisdom. Hail, inner fire, inner star. Touch the cosmos. Be touched in kind. Hail to you always that keeps us dancing. Hail to you. All right, welcome, folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of Around Grandfather Fire. This is episode 129 with my good friends and co-hosts, Snow and Emily Streaking Fate. How are you all doing tonight?
I'm doing all right. How about you, Snow?
I'm doing well. I've been writing a bunch of blog posts lately, wrote one on learning, which I was very proud of. And the other day they announced that at this online Gaulish convention thing, I'm going to be doing a presentation on the underworld and things deep, dark, dead, and chthonic. So that's pretty exciting. That's happening on the weekend of the 25th and 26th next month. So that should be cool.
Good.
Yeah.
And so we can have that in the show notes for when you're going to be doing that, yes?
We can put a link to the event. I don't know if the actual schedule as for what time slot I'm on is up yet, but I'll be there at
That's
some
fair.
point. Yeah. So that was exciting. How are you?
That's very exciting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I am doing pretty well, actually. I got some good sleep. I've got the alpha edition of my first two books finally done, and I'm waiting on reader feedback to launch into beta, which is not something I'm used to because the last time I put together a book, I just kind of got it was an anthology, so I put it together, contacted the various authors, said, does this look good to you? And then we went, aha, forward. This is a different animal altogether, and the waiting for the feedback bit is it's not nail biting. It's just, okay, I have to take my hands off the project for a bit and wait. So it's not something I'm used to, but it's a good feeling to finally at least have the alpha state done. Now, when it comes to beta, it's going to be different because then I'm going to have to actually split the book up into two pieces.
You've made your baby, now it's in childcare.
Oh my God, I know.
Other people have to
Oh,
look after it before they return it to you.
yeah. It's it's not a bad feeling. It's a holding pattern at the moment. And the nice thing is I don't have a deadline. This is entirely self-maintained, so it's not like I'm waiting to publish this thing just yet anyway. So a lot of the feelings I'm feeling are just self-generated, which is kind of nice because it's not like I'm being like pressured from above, like you've got to get
Mm.
this manuscript done.
You were carrying it for 9 months and now it's being looked after, but it's not quite ready for a mortgage.
Pretty much. Um, Aside from that, looking forward to Troth Moot, which will be in June, I believe from the 6th to the 9th. I've put in some submissions to do workshops for that. I'm looking forward to maybe presenting, but if not, it's not gonna hurt my feelings any if I don't have to present.
I mean,
Because
you
I'm
did
sure
like 3 times at the last one, so
I mean, that's true.
yeah.
Like, all right, we're sick of hearing from this asshole. Not a lot besides going on my docket, besides the usual incredible amount of overtime at work. But life is life and life moves on.
You're still
So
working like 16 hours.
yeah, at least 3 times a week, sometimes 4. So, keeping busy between
Mm,
work with a little W, work with a capital W, family, and everything else.
yeah.
But I don't know, like this show and a lot of the other stuff that I do as part of my spiritual work is part of what keeps me going. This is the stuff that job allows me to do. So that's where I take a lot of my pride and my pleasure from is, yeah, I'm working a lot, but it lets me do stuff like this. So
Nice.
yeah. So, no, would you like to introduce our guest?
I would love to introduce our guest. So, our guest is Marco Visconti. He is a lifelong student and practitioner of the Western Esoteric Tradition, with a specialist focus on Thelema, Aleister Crowley, and esoteric Freemasonry. He's the author of the book, The Aleister Crowley Manual, Thelemic Magic for Modern Times, and leads classes on Thelemic Magic and Crowley, as well as being a musician and DJ. So, welcome to the show, Marco.
Well, thank you all of you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here around Grandfather Fire.
Well, thank you for coming on. This has been this is your subjects are completely out of my wheelhouse, or at least have been for a considerable amount of time. So I was really excited to have you on. And let's dive right into it. Like, oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
I'm happy to answer questions. Right? What are your questions on Thelema and Aleister Crowley?
Well, to start with, like, what do you mean when you say Western Esoteric Tradition? Because, like, I know what pops up in my head.
Yeah.
I think ceremonial magic, I think Hermeticism, I think Thelema, but because our audience is so varied, we may not all have the same understanding of what you mean when you say Western magic tradition. Can you dig into that term?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I would like to start with the fact that I'm old, and since I'm closer to 50 than I am to 40 now, which is terrible, but still, the point I'm making is that I grew up with the fact that term meant really only something, and that was as you said, ceremonial magic mostly, and so the evolution of ceremonial magic from Hermeticism, so from late antiquity, then coming into the Middle Ages, the Grimoire tradition, as much as we know of the Grimoire tradition, because of course it's very varied, and then Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, and then finally the magical revival of the Victorian time here in England, with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and at the same time, the influence of Theosophy, which was actually bringing in more gnosis from the East. Of course, Theosophy is a very mixed bag, right? Like in 2024, we can say freely that in fact the term Western Esoteric Tradition now should actually expand and have a wider scope than the one that I had, growing up, and in fact, starting to practice this series of practices, very, very varied, as you can imagine. So my specific focus would be exactly I would say anything that stems from this, this thread, this thread that stems from late antiquity into the Victorian revival. And then, for me in particular, it founds its repository in Thelema, in the revelation of Aleister Crowley, and in the fact that in 1904 something was received, like a book was received, the Book of the Law, or Liber Alve Legis, and this book ushered in a new eon, and but with that also a new way of thinking magic and spiritual evolution. For us Thelemites, of course, right? Like I'm not the kind of Thelemite that believes in my own supply, if I can say that, in the sense that, like, I'm not the kind of Thelemite that will say, I have the only truth, even if it's quite common amongst Thelemites, especially Thelemites of a certain disposition. For me, the perspective is more that I found gnosis and truth into Thelema. So in when I say Thelema, I really mean not so much Crowley, even if Crowley is a very important character, obviously, and even if I recognize Crowley as a prophet, that is, as someone who opened the door and let something come in, right? But for me, the gnosis and the teachings of Thelema really are found in what we call the Holy Books. It's a series of texts that were received by Aleister Crowley. And by received, I really mean, I guess we can say channeled, even if, again, it's also channeled is a very loaded term. But it's undeniable that these books pretty much, were almost like vomited forth by Crowley in a very short, in very few days, right? He was like just writing pages and pages and pages and pages. I mean, he was a bit of a graphomaniac, if I can say that term, but in general, that was a lot even for him. And it's interesting that these books in particular all have a very specific voice. Crowley was kind of unable to not let his voice come through his diaries. This is very clear when you read all his diaries, which he left in copious amounts. If you read his novels, but in general, you can hear Crowley's tone, which I think it's a great thing. I mean, to be recognizable as a writer, it's great, right? You say, okay, this is your style. You can like it, you can like it, but at least it's your style. But the Holy Books really seem that there are different voices speaking. Like, I mean, of course, the central Holy Book is Liber Alve Legis, the Book of the Law. And in that book alone, you have different voices, right? In the same, not only the 3 chapters that each are different voices, like you have Nuit, Hadith, and Rahur Kuit, which can be understood as the 3 main deities of Thelema, even if personally, I don't think that Thelema has any deities at all. It's more that it's a bit more complicated, and we can get into that next. But in general, you have these 3 main voices, okay, and then some others as well. Some other come in and out, and then you see the same in the other Holy Books. So, long story short, this is what the Western Esoteric Tradition is for me, and this is the kind of the series of teachings that I set up to write about and to teach others, right? Everybody who's actually interested in these themes, mostly because growing up, it was very difficult for me to find reputable sources. I mean, I'm Italian. I've been living in London for the last 11 years, and before that, I pretty much lived around the world as a musician. But growing up in Italy in the 90s, really, it was very hard to get anything. Like my first approach with Aleister Crowley was an edition of Magic in Theory and Practice, which was basically a bad translation of a 72 edition. And the 72 edition of Magic is not the best already. And the translation was so bad that chunks of text were missing. So I was reading, I was like, oh, that doesn't make sense. And then it turned out that this translation, which was done in the 70s, and the translator just gave up at some point. It's like, I don't know what this means. I have no idea what it is. I'm just going to go on and write something else. So that's what I grew up with. So, in time I joined some orders, as you usually do when you are interested in these topics and these practices. And some 20 years later, I realized that maybe the time for orders is over, and maybe there are different ways to communicate this message to those who are interested, without roping them into hierarchies, without, caving into all the sorts of politics, nepotism, all these kind of things that has really nothing to do with gnosis or spiritual attainment or spiritual evolution. It's so human that it kind of is like the complete and polar opposite of what you're supposed to look for. So that's what I'm doing right now.
In the lead up to doing this, I saw on your Spotify you've made a playlist of all your prior sort of podcast interviews and things. So I was listening through some of those just to sort of get a sense of I'd heard some of them before anyways, but revision's always good. And on one of them, I actually made a note of this. You put you said, "I would like to get to a point where Thelema is not Crowley."
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really interesting line. I mean, you kind of touched on that peripherally just now, but I was wondering if you could maybe sort of go further into that.
Yeah, in the sense that I got a lot of trouble for comments like that. Like, every time I say that I would love to see Thelema growing post-Crowley, moving away from Crowley, people get really, really, really angry. What I notice is that, and I noticed this in being involved with the Thelemic milieu for the last 30 years, really. Most Thelemites nowadays really want to be part of Aleister Crowley's fan club. Right? They are drawn to Thelema, not so much because of the message of Thelema, what Thelema should do, what Thelema should allow you to be, but mostly because they want to belong to the same group that Aleister Crowley, this important figure, this almost like this rock star, right, belong to. This is especially true for the most famous of Thelemic groups, which is Ordo Templariensis or OTO, which is the one you can most easily join. They're the only one that have a presence worldwide. Very small group. I mean, we're talking about 2,000 people worldwide, so incredibly tiny. But still, I mean, it's if you live in a big city, you might have an OTO local body there, which could be a lodge, an oasis, a camp. I was a member of the OTO for quite some time. Treasurer of Ameth Lodge here in London, was very involved in it for a while. I really believed into that that organization and what it was set up to do. And then things went sideways for many reasons. I wrote about it, but in general, I found out that first of all, it wasn't for me, and second of all, like it wasn't really delivering what it promised on the tin. But also, I found out that pretty much, I would say, a good 93% of the people that were a member of OTO, they didn't care about Thelema. They wanted to be an OTO so that they could to follow into Crowley's footsteps. Now, it's really hard to even consider divorcing Crowley from Thelema. And I never advocated to do that at all, in the sense that him being the prophet, being the one who has, first of all, the one that wrote all the material, right? We have, I mean, of course, in the 70 odd years since he died, other people wrote about it. I mean, I'm one of them. But in general, we're still a generation removed from the founder, right? So we still go back to his life, to his exploits, to his writings. So I never really wanted to say that. I don't know when I never meant moving past Crowley to mean like just cancel Crowley, because once again, Crowley also was a very difficult character, right? A very different person. I don't think I would have loved to be Crowley's friend, and possibly the feeling would have been very mutual. Like we definitely would have had a very different perspective on pretty much everything, right? Like in politics, for instance, like Crowley was what we would call here and today like a high Tory, so an extreme conservative. In the United States, you can think of it as a, I don't know, extreme Republican. I don't know. But also, it is also true to say that he was definitely like a queer individual, like he was openly bisexual in times where this was very heavily frowned upon, right? Not even that. Like, he was contemporary to Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde was, exiled from the UK because he
Oh
was
shit, you're right.
openly gay. I mean, that was the level, right? And Crowley didn't care. Like, Crowley actually was openly bisexual, and in fact, he never made a secret of all his, male lovers, right? So you had this very complex character that on one side is incredibly reactionary and right-wing, if we want to say this term, and on not just on on political stances, also on social stances. He was of course, he saw himself as an aristocrat. He wasn't really an aristocrat, but he saw himself as an aristocrat. He was an incredibly wealthy individual, at least at the beginning. Like
Right.
when his father died, he inherited the equivalent of around £6 million, which is what, $9 million. By the time he was 30, mid-30s, all that money was gone. So you can imagine how much he must have spent, right? It's crazy if you think about it. But he was really living as an incredibly wealthy individual, and he had this perspective of seeing himself removed from the rest of the world, right? While at the same time wanting to enmesh himself with life at its more primal, if you want, right? So yeah, a very complex individual. A person that was definitely very nasty to the people around him. Like, he was definitely nasty to almost all his lovers, male or female alike. Was a terrible and absent father. But then again, he also had the moment where he was really almost the polar opposite. It was like, I like to say that Crowley, like every genius, it was incredibly complex and multifaceted. Now, the problem that I noticed, I'll go back to your question, right, is that contemporary Thelemites seem to be unable to not see him as a completely, like, either they want to see him as like the almost the Übermensch of a Nietzschean disposition, like the one that, why my hand is up, I don't know, I'm gonna put it down. Anyway, like, they don't want to see like this perfect individual, or they want to see him on the other side as someone who was completely like just the nastiest person ever. There's no middle ground. So my point is, how about we just stop this constant quarreling about trying to figure out if Crowley was a good guy or a bad guy. Just let's accept what he did. Let's work on the material he left us, and let's make our Thelema going forward, as opposed to always trying to, reinforce the idea that Thelema is only the Thelema of Aleister Crowley. Now, I say this, and the usual commentary that I get is that, well, Marco, you're saying this because you want to be the next Aleister Crowley, because you want to make like a religion about yourself. This happened plenty of times, like constantly. Like, it's all about you instead of the prophet. And I was like, okay, it's not that, but at the end of the day, as Thelemites, it really should become about, basically, one of the main tenets of Thelema is, of course, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, which is much more complex than doing whatever you want, as I think everybody knows this by now. But what that really means One hopes, yeah, of course, right? Well, I mean, of course, I'm talking with fellow neo-pagans and fellow magicians, so I guess over here everybody is clear about that. Of course, when you speak with I don't know, UFO Twitter or all the conspiracy theories, that's another bag. But of course, I hope here that everybody should know that do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Doesn't mean do whatever you want. It's actually a very strict intimation on discovering your true self, discovering who you truly are, and what is your purpose here in this life. And I will even say that this is just a basic understanding of what that means. There are deeper layers and deeper meanings of this, right? Because it's more about true will, really is transpersonal. Like it's all about actually living the connection with your incarnated self and finding out the divinity that lies inside of you. Well, if this is the main tenet of Thelema, how can we keep pretending that it must be about Aleister Crowley? Surely it must be about whatever lies inside ourself, right? In the Book of the Law, Hadith, which is one of the, let's say, gods of Thelema, it's a bit more complex than that, but it says that I am the fire that burns in the heart of every man and in the core of every star. So that is one of the essence of the message, right? Hadith can be seen, in fact, as another reverberation of the concept of the Holy Guardian Angel. And the Holy Guardian Angel, which is a lofty term to mean that sliver of divinity we've been discussing. Well, the Holy Guardian Angel is what allows you to discover and live your true will. So all of this, to me, it's obviously implies cannot be about Aleister Crowley. Crowley did his own will, and in fact, by living his will, left us the 93 current or the tradition of Thelema. But now it's down to each Thelemite, in fact, to, if possible, actually to live a life as full and as inspiring for others as Crowley did. But unfortunately, all I see around it's still ongoing, right? I don't think I will stop seeing in this lifetime. Unfortunately, it's really about like, no, I want to be a Thelemite because I want to be like Crowley. Like if Daddy Crowley comes back, I would get a big pat on my back. And like I don't know if the same in your religion, but what I notice is in general, this is a tendency in every new religious movements, right? Like there's always like a tendency of those who want to carry the flame forward, right, and do something new. And there's always those who, even if maybe they're very involved with the community, and they're very involved, even with the philosophy, even with the practice, at the end of the day, they're still doing it because they really wanted to, like an updated version of the whatever religion or spirituality they left behind. Well, for me, really, it's about like changing the paradigm completely. Like just today, I was, in fact, discussing for the nth time online about is the other big question, like, is Thelema religion? By all means, Thelema ticks all the boxes for a religion. Like it's a coherent metaphysical system. It has a theology. It has a cosmology. It has practices. It is a religion, right? But is it really? Because at the end of the day, in my experience, at least, religion it's some. I mean, even looking at the term itself from Latin, re ligare, to bind again, right? What do you bind again? Well, you bind again to the gods. You bind again yourself again, maybe to a community. Well, Thelema really wants to, in fact, almost like destroy all those knots, all those binds, right? Even possibly to the idea of community itself. I don't think any of us is an island. I think we all need community. We all need other people, right? Like I'm definitely not the kind. I mean, I'm definitely not the kind of Ayn Rand libertarian. I'm not a libertarian by any stretch of the mean. But I don't think everybody is an island. However, Thelema, I do think it almost challenges you to say, okay, at the end of the day, the communion with the divine is such a personal and intimate experience that cannot be shared, right? At some point you have to go on your own into that wilderness. We are in Thelema. We have the metaphor of the desert or the abyss, right? Maybe you can think of it like at some point you have to go on your own. You have to cross the abyss and be reborn as Nemo, again Latin for no one, and that no one for me. So there's a big hint there, right? But anyway, I'm rambling. I don't know if I answer your question.
No, that was good.
I very much hear echoes of the issues that you have with Crowley being the focus as opposed to the prophet. I have echoes of that I see in heathenry, where people are reaching back, but the disconnect for at least some folks is bringing that forward, and the notion that tradition is the worship of the fire, not of the ashes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very much hearing this reflected in some of the things that you're bringing forward with Crowley being the centralizing figure. I think the big difference is that heathenry has so many communities around it now that we have different figures around whom people are polarized. But now we're getting to this point where you've got some big organizations which are doing good work, and then you've got a lot of independent folks in the middle kind of figuring themselves out. And it sounds to me like Thelema, from the people that I've met that are Thelemites, yourself now included, there's a lot of, funny enough, I think there's a lot of soul searching going on in a lot of the Western esoteric tradition, not only in terms of who the Western esoteric tradition is for and is part of, but also how do we walk forward with these people in our past, some of whom have done really nasty, horrid shit, and how do we divorce, or how do we move through, like, for instance, Blavatsky being a very big figure that a lot of people are having to grapple with now, because looking in the rearview mirror, holy shit, what a figure. And she casts a long shadow, and that's in some ways a problem because of the kinds of shadows she casts and the legacy she's left. So much of the language from Crowley, from Blavatsky, and from a lot of their contemporaries is left to us now that we have to grapple with and figure out, okay, do we keep this verbiage? If we do, what does it mean? So a lot of the stuff that you're talking about with taking Crowley out of Thelema as the figurehead is, I think, what a lot of folks in neo-paganism and Western traditions, more broadly speaking, are having to grapple with.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely correct. You mentioned that, you know, in Ethenry you have different organizations. It's the same in Thelema, right? Like, a lot of people from the outside think that there's the OTO and that's about it. It's not really that.
Right.
Like, the OTO itself has, you know, there's a main OTO, which is the one that most people join, the one I joined, in fact. But then there are other, contending OTOs as well. And then there's the AA, where the AA, you know, stands for Argentum Astrum, at least that's the name in the outer. And most people also don't understand that the OTO is not the magical order. The OTO is it's more like a Thelemic Freemasonry in a way, okay? Mm-hmm. And it's a fraternity, right? There's magic in it, there's rituals in it, but in many ways it's more about, again, Crowley's idea of, you know, let's get the blueprint of Freemasonry, which at the time was super popular. Let's do it Thelemic though. Like, let's do a Thelemic version of it. Well, by the AA is really the magical engine of Thelema, right? And trust me, since nobody was ever able to copyright the logo of the AA the same way they did with the OTO, it's really wide there. And there's so many different lineages, so many contending figureheads. I'm one, right? So it's wild out there, which is also why I'm personally coming to the idea that possibly, if you're interested in Thelema, which really is a path of deep transformation, I would call it a path of apotheosis, really. Like, it really is about a path to godhood, right? But of course, not in a edgelordy sense, right? Like, not in a become a living god kind of sense. Please not.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Absolutely not. I'm just getting shivers only thinking about that guy. But the point is, it is a path of apotheosis. So in many ways, can there be a community of gods, right? Like, I mean, we say that we're all stars, and stars tend to be all, in full equilibrium one with another. But possibly the essence of starhood, it's also that it stands on its own and it shines out light. And there's something that I'm maybe not even very good at vocalizing yet, because it's something I've been thinking a lot myself. But the idea of starhood is really about, like, standing pretty much alone in the universe, right? Like, you can see other stars, and maybe you can see planets, but there's things around you. And that starhood, which is an allegory for divinity itself, it's what Thelema is promising you, right? So long story short, it's definitely true that there's a lot of soul searching going in Thelema, as it is in neo-paganism. Also because I think it's the first time that we and I say collectively we, across all all of us who do not belong to a more mainstream religious organization. It's the first time that we have not been hunted down and killed for a while. Like it's been like the last maybe 100 years or so. I mean, since the magical revival of and I don't know how long it's gonna last, given the political and the social political turmoil that we're all living in current times, like literally right now. So maybe, you need that 150 years to actually really start that soul searching. I feel like we are living in, we're literally like the Christians in the caves right now. I mean, at least definitely Thelema, for us, it's the case, right? We're like, what, today, this year is the 120th year since the reception of the Book of the Law, so since the start of Thelema, even if Crowley really tried to ignore it for the first few years and really did not start to put any real work around Thelema till 1906, 1907, those years, right? So a few years later, but still, if you look at the history of Christianity, and I'm speaking about Christianity because, of course, it's here in the West, it's the religion that possibly we all know the better, because I mean we all grew up in Christian societies, right? If you look at Christianity, 120 years into Christianity, oh boy, were they doing strange things, right? Like it's so funny. Every time I get some of these Christian fundamentalists that, unfortunately, they are definitely on the rise, that come onto my reels, my social media, and say, "Oh, you Satanists, you will die because I have the real religion." And then from time to time, I engage with them, and they don't realize that if a Christian if Jesus Christ, if he existed as an historical figure. I don't know if he exists as a historical figure, but let's say, right, if he would come back now, I don't think many Christians will recognize his teachings as Christian because, it had 2,000 years of evolution. So I feel like we are really in the same slot, right, the same spot, I would say, better. So there's a lot of soul searching going, and there's a lot of uncertainty about our nature and our identity. Like, I guess that's both the good part of it and the bad part of it. It's good for people. I feel like it's good for people like me. I like to be there when things start. I'm more of a starter than a maintainer. I don't know if it makes sense, but I like to start things, and then I let people with much more patience than I do to maintain things going. So I'm happy to be here, but it's definitely not easy especially when a lot of people that are supposed to be on your side actually only want to see only put everything in bad faith. Like, you're always doing it because, of course, like, you want to be the next Crowley. No, I don't. I mean, Jesus Christ. You see the life he led, right? Especially since the money ran out. No, thank you. I'd rather not, right?
Well, there's a big difference between... Oh, go ahead, Snow.
No, I was going to say, if you could get his initial bank balance, then maybe, but you'd probably spend it differently.
Yeah, exactly. Like, invest that money.
Yeah.
There's a wide swath between being a desert father versus being a bishop.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's really where I'm seeing a lot of your perspective, both from the Substacks of yours that I've read and just hearing you now. A lot of your perspective is, okay, like the first 100 years of Christianity, what are they doing? Well, you've got the wild ass mystics on the one hand, and then the people who are trying to cobble together this nascent religion. And I think one of the things that people should really think about in terms of this, like, not only do we not have the amount of years around that Christianity does, but a lot of our, and I'm speaking in a very, very broad a lot of our trajectory, which some of it takes from the OTO, because modern heathenry wouldn't exist without Wicca. Wicca wouldn't exist without the OTO. I know that's going to ruffle some...
Don't say that to the Wiccans. They really...
Oh, no. Like, I mean, that... fuck it, I'll just ruffle all the feathers. A lot of modern heathens do not like or do not know this about modern heathenry, where we take a lot of our cues from Wicca. But I mean, the Hammerite is basically the different variation on the LBRP. When you look at the history of who was practicing it and who brought it forward, the Hammerite, as it was practiced, is basically a heathenized version of Wicca. and its opening rituals. So, okay, but that shouldn't be a source of frustration or shame. It's just an acknowledgement of what was to me. But I think we're very much in this period where we've got a bishopric which is developing in various communities, but we've also got desert fathers on the other hand, and I think that's where at least some of our internecine conflicts are being felt right now. Is on the one hand, you've got some of these people who are taking up as though they are celebrities in the desert, and then you've got other folks who are like, well, I'm going to go in the desert, I'm going to go do my thing, and whenever this is done percolating, I'll be back. And then you've got other folks whose talents and skills are just much more in line with developing community and making sure that this thing stays cohesive and together, and different strokes for different folks, and also just different abilities and skill sets.
Yeah,
and I think
absolutely.
That's something you're speaking directly to, is we don't all have to be this. Like, if we are our own stars, we're not going to shine the same. We're not, you don't have to be a bright dwarf when I'm a blue.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? I also think that in time, things will sort out themselves, right? As it happens, right? People will keep doing what they're set up to do. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I am a bishop in the Gnostic Church, but I'm definitely more of a desert fighter figure, mystic figure, right? I want to do that, right? Because I also think that if we don't push the magical mystical envelope, well, we're gonna secularize too much, and I don't think I mean, at least I don't want my tradition to become only secularized, right? Maybe it's great for folks that want community. It's great to have it, right? In many ways, when I was in OTO, that was all about, like, the OTO was about building community, building a Thelemic community, and I really believed it. And then maybe it's because I got burned so badly by that I'm now like, I'm not gonna touch it. I'm not even with a 30-foot pole. Someone else will take care of it. But at the same time, I really think that, at least in Thelema, the risk of secularize it too much and really turn it only, in the Aleister Crowley fan club, where everybody knows everything about, all the first editions of Liber ABA and all the various variants of the Equinox, etc., but no one knows why Liber Samek. It's, just to give you an example, it's really not the Thelemic ritual for the Holy Guardian Angel. It's a bit more complex than that. Like, when I set up to write my book, if you read it, it's aimed at the complete beginners, right? I wrote it in a way and in a style that somebody that never heard anything about any of this could pick it up and make some sense of it. I hope a lot of sense of it, right? But I also decided to start there, even if maybe that's not exactly what excites me anymore, because I've done it 30 years ago. It's because during the lockdowns, during the pandemic, when I started that it's nothing else to do, right? Like, let's start like a newsletter and then a Patreon, and then lo and behold, like 6 months into the pandemic, I was doing Zoom calls to 300 people 3 times a week, right? Because there was nothing else to do. And then I realized that, well, wow, no one knows how to do an LBRP. No one knows what the LBRP, what are the components of the LBRP. Like, maybe if those who actually know how to practice it because they learn it by rota, they have no idea what it means. And I was like, okay, so we are that level. And then I realized, well, yeah, I mean, Marco, that's you already knew this from the OTO, but you just kind of like almost like you decided not to look at it when you were into it because you were so involved with the OTO. I really wanted to believe in that dream in a way. But the problem is that, like, I realized, if we're losing the magical mystical side, what are we? Are we like, we're gonna end up the same route that Freemasonry went? And I'm a Freemason. I'm an active Freemason. I love Freemasonry. I love it for its ritual. I love it for the fact that it pretty much like tries to teach people to be decent human beings, right? That's but at the end of the day, Freemasonry started as an initiatory system, right? And now it is almost solely a dinner club. And here in the UK, it's the second biggest charity, which is amazing. Like we raise millions and millions of pounds every year for very worthy causes. But then when you speak with the average Freemason about the idea that maybe, the lodge is a representation of the inner temple, et cetera, they look at you like, what are you talking about? Famously, recently, someone is not going to be named, quite a famous Freemason here in London, he was invited to another order that's very an appendant order to Freemasonry, which is very much theurgy based, right? Because they still exist. And he went on Facebook and say, "Oh, today was my first meeting with this group, and they told me to do this exercise where I imagine a temple. They're nuts." And I was like, "Oh, we are at that level," because that's exactly so. Basically, what they were teaching him is just to do a path working, nothing crazy, but for this person who's a very prominent Freemason, it was inconceivable. And I don't want Thelema to go that way, right? Because I see in 50 years down the line that Thelema, it's all about knowing how many first edition of, Magic in Theory and Practice were there. The first two, by the way, because there's 1929 and 1930 editions. There's the subscriber edition and another edition. So I don't want that, right? I mean, it's another thing that's telling is there's a website called 100monkey.com, amazingly structured website that has the complete bibliography of Aleister Crowley to the most minute ephemera, but there's nothing about it on the rituals. Why is that? Like why some people will tell you, well, because this is secret material. No, it's not. Crowley published about it. So why nobody cares about it, or why there's not something similar? Why all the work goes into one direction or the other? So anyway, I'm ranting as usual, but sorry about that.
No, I think you touched on a few good points there. I think the fact that when you've been doing anything like this for a while, it's very easy to forget how far you've come and make the assumption other people don't necessarily know as much, and so having to revisit those basics. I think that is a really good point. And another point you raised was about how with these religions, these traditions, these practices, having more sides and more facets to them shouldn't mean we carve the rest away. Mm-hmm. Because we want depth and we want dimension here. We don't, I think a lot of this runs the risk of trying to appeal to everybody and winding up pleasing nobody in the process.
Absolutely. And unfortunately in Thelema, there's been this movement of trying to establish almost like an orthodoxy, and that is really the people that run the OTO. They also run an AA lineage, and there was even like a couple of books that came out in the last decade where they were trying to push a narrative like that only their version was the right version. Of course, it was absolutely laughed at, like it was a complete failure, but it was an attempt to try and make everything fold into one mold. I don't think it's possible. As we were saying before, I think that we must let this thing grow organically, and it means that there will be different people doing different things. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I grew up in the shadow of the Vatican. It's not a good shadow. I don't want that in my let's call it religion for a second with Thelema. I don't want that in Thelema, and I don't think it's good for any alternative to mainstream religions, right? Like this centralized, unified vision seems appealing because, at least there's structure, at least there's a clear vision. Well, is there, right? Or is there restrictionism instead? Like there's only like one right way. And again, like Christianity had to tackle this through, all the heresies, starting with Valentinian heresies, et cetera, up until the various councils and the restoration. It's the problem of religion, I think. It's the problem of the fact that it's really hard to put the spiritual experience into one neat little box. which is, the one neat little box is something that we as human beings love to. It's almost like it's a beautiful utopia. We all want to believe it, but no, the reality, it's messy and it's multifaceted. And in fact, I think we should invite that, and we should embrace that multifacetedness. I don't know if that's a word.
It works. And I mean, if anything, you would think that would be an advantage of having all these different orders and traditions and things, because everyone's going to find something that's going to work for them, and different ones will lean into different facets and different aspects more, so then people can go that way accordingly.
I think it's good to have options, right? I also have famously ranted against the idea of hierarchical orders in general, but I guess this is really, again, I think this is really like a Thelemic viewpoint on this, because again, Thelema, I insist that it's really about finding your own divine spark and follow that and become almost like become dedicated to that and that alone. And so it's either that or you are part of a hierarchy. In the OTO, in the first degree that you are initiated into, which is Minerval, Crowley tried to tackle this problem smartly. At the end of the Minerval initiation, there's a lecture called the First Paradox of Philosophy. I'm not going to repeat it, but it pretty much tells you, well, you came here for freedom, but now we're going to shackle you into all these hierarchies because it's good for you. And I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, thank you, Crowley. Like it doesn't work like that. It really goes like into sense, well, as the amoeba eventually evolves into more structured form to create the body, which is, of course, it also tells the fact that Crowley didn't really understand biology at biology of the time. Anyway, it's all about like trying to convince you that in order to be free, which is one of the promises of Thelema, you have to follow orders. But then again, that's particularly true for the OTO, which has a very unique flavor to it. Again, I told you, it is Thelemic Freemasonry with a bit of a militaristic slant to it. In fact, it almost wants to be, well, the Ordo Templi Orientis is like the Order of the Temple. It's almost like to be, it's like the Templars, but the Thelemic Templars, right? But a lot of people in Thelemic circles have used this first paradox of philosophy as to say, well, you can be free, but you have to do what I say first because I know best. I was like, yeah, that doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. Sorry. So long story short, I think it's good to have choices, but I really hope we could move away from hierarchical orders, because hierarchy, in my experience, always breeds nepotism, people that want to, suck it up to the leaders so that they go to the degrees faster. That's what happens in OTO. Like literally, you are not going to be invited to certain degrees unless you are seen as a good soldier. And so somebody that really towards the party line. That's exactly how it is, right? It's incredibly nepotistic. That's also what, like, it's funny because if you look at the OTO figures, you see that there's basically the curve on the degrees. Like there's let's say 400 Minervals, you get 4 people that get to Perfect Initiate, which is the last of the known invitational degrees. So there's a lot of people, like, it's very, very, and people, they will say, well, people don't stick to it because it's hard. No, it's just because people don't stick to it because at some point, stop following the orders and stop like towing the party line and stop just being nice to leaders. And then after that, there's the real invitational degrees, which you only have access if you are friends with the boss, pretty much. And by the way, that implies also a certain kind of friendship. And I'm not going to go into more details, but I guess all of you can imagine what that means.
Mm-hmm. So what you're telling me is that Thelema has the exact same issues that several neo-pagan groups do, and you're not especially unique snowflakes in this regard. Excellent.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope, we're all the same. I think that's the problem. I mean, that's why I think as humans, as humanity, we need to find a way to do our spirituality outside of hierarchies. Right? I don't know. I don't have the answer on how to do it. Like I'm trying ways, right? Like because outside of the courses that I teach online, because I have this website called magic@marcovisconti.com, which is Magic with Tears, where I teach classes. And there's a platform where you can join. I have 400 people in it right now. But that's almost like it's an outer court. Over the years, I have been working with a select, very, very small group of people that I only know in person, that basically because I really decided, and I think I did the right thing, that if you want to really have a more deep experience of magic and mysticism, you cannot be with anyone that you just met on the internet. It has to be with people that you actually trust and you would invite in your house, right?
But Marco, that TikTok was made specifically for me.
Right. That happens all the time, by the way. So yeah, anyway, I think it's possible to find alternatives to hierarchy, but like I say, I don't have the answers yet. So
I know one thing that we've sort of talked about a lot, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about, is how in a sort of the Christian West or the post-Christian West, depending on families and regions and so on, is that we have this issue of people coming to these alternative religions, these occult traditions, these pagan movements and such. A lot of the time it's because they're interested in alternative things. You know, they're the people who'll go and look at the industrial section of the record shop, or they'll go look at horror films or whatever, because they want something away from the norm and away from the mainstream. And that branches into the different aspects of their life. But an interesting contradiction that I see come up again and again and again and again is that when they get into these magical groups, religious organizations or religious communities, what have you, is that they then get in there and then want someone to tell them what to do.
All the time, right?
Yeah.
It's always like this, right? Because again, we are all children of 2,000 years of what I call as a Thelema, the Eon of the Father, or the Eon of the Slain God, whereby the idea is that somebody will come and save you because you cannot save yourself. Like, you've done something horrible, and so you need someone, Jesus or Sky Daddy or whatever you want to call it, to come and save you. So of course, even those who feel that push to something different, at first, I mean, there's always like the moment where they join something and they really expect to find, I don't know, instead of church, goth church or metal church or whatever that is, right? I mean, in reality is that no, in fact, we're trying to do something really, really different. And some people stay and most people leave. And then there are those who stay but try to still make goth church or metal church. So I think those are the people we need to find a way to speak with them and say, you're doing it wrong. Stop doing what you're doing, and let's try and do something else instead.
Yeah, it's kind of they're taking Christianity and taking out Jesus and putting in Crowley in the same slot, or with Thor
or Odin
or whoever.
Thor.
Yeah,
exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, not good.
So is the aim in your Magic Without Tears group a place for people to learn without the hierarchical overlay?
Yeah, absolutely. My aim with Magic Without Tears, I mean, Magic Without Tears is not an order. It's an online learning tool, okay? In the sense that, I mean, I set up a series of courses now. It's getting many courses now. And I'm trying to teach through each one of these courses. It's all like modules. So like you can do you should start at the beginning, but you can start wherever you want. And there is a suggested sequence of where you should go through and how to learn it. But in fact, again, you're free to do what you want, and you're free to get out of it how much you want, really. And I am the tutor. But I always say, like, don't call me teacher, consider me like a personal trainer. I'm a personal trainer. This is a gym, right? I can tell you how to do all the squats and which repetitions to do, which machines to use. But at the end of the day, you have to do the work. And I am not here. I'm not your guru. I'm not your master, right? And I really want to keep, Magic Without Tears will never change. Will always be this this type of approach, right? When I was speaking about like a more inner circle, if you want, even there, I insist on like I'm not the guru. I'm not. I mean, I am the initiator there because I mean I'm a lineage older, and so I'm bringing. I mean I've initiated a group of people into this lineage, right? But at the same time, we're all friends. There's no degree systems. It's all about like, you know, at some point you take on a parampara, that is, you take like on a lineage, and then what you do with that lineage is down to you, right? And then we can come together and do ritual together, and we've done it quite some time now. The big problem here in London is that everything is insanely expensive, so we don't have like a temple space, and also houses are very small, so we don't have houses. Like it's not like we can meet the people out. But like there's been moments, especially during the lockdowns when I was living in Glastonbury, I had a much bigger house there, so that was possible to meet there more regularly. But in general, that's almost like it is in fact completely separated from Magic Without Tears. It happens to be that some of the people that eventually came into this group came from Magic Without Tears. That's how I met them first. But again, those were still people that, you know, they were first of my students, really. And then we became friends, right? Because again, I've seen what happens when you pass on initiation and when you enter a circle with people that you only know because they signed up a form and that was it. Like, because that's the ODO approach, right? Like, in order to be a member of ODO, you have to find 2 sponsors. But the reality is that, I mean, I will be honest here, this will change from city to city, from country to country. But in general, my experience, it was always that everybody would sign people in, because at the end of the day, Minerval, you know, it's just it's just like an introductory degree. It's not a real degree. The reality there is that you would end up with people in the circle, like doing actual rituals, from time to time, maybe even naked, right? Like, and people were there really like perving on the women or the men, because that would happen as well. And then, you know, you had to always like, I don't want that to happen in my circles, right? Like that's, and in order to avoid that, the only way that the only thing you can do to avoid that, for me, is if you know somebody well. I mean, I put this rule, which is very Wiccan inspired, if I'm not a Wiccan, that I will never, you know, invite anyone to the circle, inner circle, unless I know them personally for a year and a day. And that means that, you know, we hang out regularly for a year and a day. We went to the cinema, we went to the pub, we went to do hiking, you know, like things like that. Like we've been friends. And at that point, okay, if you're interested, then you can actually, and if you ask me also, because that's not something I'm going to propose, you have to ask, and then, you know, you can receive initiation. There's been like, so far around like 8 people, when it's not many, right? Compared to the 400 that I have in Magic Without Tears right now. And we're almost like 600 people that I met since the pandemic, you know, that came in and out from Patreon first, and then Magic Without Tears right now. So it's like, imagine like this is the funnel, right? It's very, very, very tiny. And I think it has to be tiny because again, I'm a very difficult person to hang out with. I have a lot of opinions. I'm very moody. I'm not an easy person, right? So we need to meet in the middle.
I mean, one thing that occurred to me that we were talking earlier about sort of looking at Crowley as the figure and what he represents, and also looking at Crowley and the work that he did, but also looking at Crowley as the person, the human being, and all the things that happen there, and sort of how there is nuance here. And as you were talking there, I was thinking there's a lot of nuance there in that you see all the discourse and the rhetoric around gatekeeping as a very, very loaded term.
Mm-hmm.
But in a way, what you're talking about there is it being a necessity for not only people being ready to engage with different practices, different rituals, different lessons, having the understanding necessary, but also just basic security and safety there. You were talking about, you know, treating other people there respectfully, treating the women there or the female presenting people there respectfully, and those kinds of things. So I appreciate your going into sort of the nuance of that concept.
as you said, gatekeeping is a loaded term, especially nowadays. But I believe that there should be some gatekeeping. I think that information should be as free as possible, so that if you're curious about something, you should have access to. But at the same time, you should not have access to something that is intimate and it has a sacrality to it. Like that should be earned. Okay, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's always history. I mean, I think only us in the West, we tend to have the problem about it because we are terrible about boundaries, right? But if you look at any other country, if you look at the African diaspora traditions, you're not going to be invited into like a hoodoo ceremony of certain type unless you are initiated into that specific, law. Or you will be invited to a peristyle, you will be invited to a public ceremony. Anything else, you can forget it, right? There's also, all this discussion that we have that, all teachings should be free. I mean, I wrote about it very recently, and all teachings should be free. Everything that you paid is wrong. I mean, try to apply for a lukumi or again, a hoodoo initiation. Those are it's incredibly expensive because the idea is that, I'm talking about money, actual money, that you give to the community, that you give to Ungan or the Mambo that initiates you because they're doing a job and they expect you to show the commitment. And this is the same in the East as well. Like if you go to India, and I'm not talking about, the marketplace of the gurus in India, which is a big problem that they have over there. But if you go to serious ashrams, if you go to serious, tantric circles, you expect to treat the guru in a certain way. Now, of course, this can become problematic if the person that's on the other side doesn't have the emotional and the spiritual maturity necessary not to turn it into a cult of personality, which was, by the way, it was Crowley's problem, 100%. He was definitely into trying to turn everything into a cult of personality, right? I would say that is the ordeal and the challenge of the teacher, of the guru, of the master, to try and avoid abusing his power. But at the same time, here in the West, we almost, to fear, try and we almost demonize this to the point where then everything should be free and everyone should have access to everything. That's not how it works, because if everything is free and everyone has access to everything, then there's no value in what you're doing. And I'll tell you what, this is something that I've seen it directly. In the first 2 years of running Magic Without Tears, every time I announced a course or a cohort, right? Because I run this course, run for several months where I teach directly. For the rest of the year, the material is self-paced, like you can buy it and you can do it on your own. But there's course where I'm there, right? And you can actually ask me questions, which is, I think, where the value really is. Well, every time the first 2 years I was running this course and announcing them, I always was giving out scholarships, right? Like we say, hey, if you want to do this and you cannot afford the cost, write me a letter, explain me why you should have access to that, and I will hear it and I will make a decision. I mean, there's not many. I can afford 5, 6, 8, something like that. Sometimes less, sometimes more. Well, I always awarded these scholarships. I would say a good 80% of the people who got the material for free never engaged with it. They completely got the material and disappeared, right? Which, okay, there's no requirement in Magic Without Tears for you to be present or engaged. Like you can get the material and do whatever you want with it. Again, if part of a live court, even if you're not part of a live court, I will answer your questions. But at the end of the day, you decide how to engage with it. But the thing is that I can also see, because I have a tool I'm using Mighty Networks, so I have a tool to see who opens because there's lessons and recordings and diagrams, there's a lot of stuff. I can see who actually clicks on it, okay? And a good 80% of the people who got the scholarship never even once opened it. So it was, and then why? Why would you do that? Because again, in my experience is that if something is completely free, unfortunately, I guess this is the malady of the West. Like we live in this late stage capitalist dystopia where we only attribute value and worth to something that we pay. But lo and behold, that is definitely my lived experience. So I think gatekeeping, the good kind of gatekeeping, is absolutely needed in order to, re-sacralize something that it's losing its sacrality. Like the fact that we're here today, it's amazing because we get to know each other through the internet because maybe we saw each other on TikTok or we saw each other on Instagram. This is amazing, right? Everything I've done in the last few years, it's because of the internet and social media. But at the same time, it's got to the point where we actually this bargain with the devil we're losing it. That's what I'm saying, right? So we have to rebalance it somehow. So yeah, I think that the right kind of gatekeeping, it's just needed, honestly.
Yeah, there's something interesting to the sort of psychological effect of if people have paid for something, even if it's a tiny amount as a kind of symbolic gesture. It makes them get more invested in it, sort of mentally and emotionally, and then they are more inclined to engage. It's interesting.
And like I was saying that again, this is possibly a problem with our capitalist societies. But then again, if you look at at societies that's maybe slightly different than ours, again, I'm thinking about Haiti and Voodoo again. I mean, no, there's money, and money goes to the spiritual practitioner that facilitates your connection with the divine. It's just that, unfortunately, there's so many, I don't want to say grifters, I suppose. I've been called a grifter multiple times by everybody who thinks that paying for magic is absolutely wrong. People told me that if you write a book and you sell it, it's wrong. If you write a book, you should give it for free. Now, I'm not joking. Like,
yeah, I've encountered that. I've encountered that. I feel you.
Yeah.
Like literally, like when it happened to me the first time, I was like, I mean, clearly this is a joke. Like, I mean, I can understand if you're pissed off because I sell courses. Okay, well, we can have a discussion about that. But a book, like this guy was serious. Like, you have to give it for free, and in fact, you need to write the second book because I want to read that as well. I was like nothing else. Should I come to your house and I don't know, like tidy things as well, something like that. It's insane. I think there's some problem. We have a little bit of problems here in the West.
Tell them to walk into a Waterstones, go over to the religion section, pick up a Bible, and walk out.
Yeah.
See how that goes for them.
Right.
Trust me.
Giving away free religious books. Yes.
I'm pretty sure they would find a way to justify. But it's also another thing I learned is that, it's a realization that came to me only in the last 7 months, last summer. I finally learned how to extricate myself from this kind of like internet chatter. It took me 45 years, well, let's say 30 years, but I'm finally not present on Reddit anymore. I'm not present on, I mean, I just don't. I just block early, block fast, easy, done.
So speaking of social media, when we were talking about you coming onto the show, you did reply to one of my tweets saying you'd looked through the episode titles and seen a reference to Yeats yeeting Crowley.
That was a great wordplay. The yeeting Crowley was amazing. Well done.
So you wanted to dispel some myths there. So
it's. For me, so for those of you listening who don't know what you're talking about, there is this ongoing myth, this ongoing story that by the time that the Golden Dawn was crumbling, Mathers, which was still the chief of the Golden Dawn, instructed Crowley, that was acting as his secretary at the time, to go back to London and go to the Isis Urania temple in Blythe Road, access the temple and get some material from it and bring it to Mathers, who was living in France, in Paris at the time. The story goes that Crowley goes there, all dressed up in a Scottish Highland regalia, apparently wearing a mask and then apparently, like, saying strange incantations, cursing everybody around him. That's the story. And the story goes that he tries to enter and goes up the stairs, but William Butler Yeats, the famous poet, which was also one of the adepts, the chief adepts at Isis Rania Temple, yeets him, like throws him down the stairs. And then Crowley is defeated and is lost, and he leaves. Now, first of all, it's always important to put things in. You always, when you hear these things, and I would suggest always to do this, if possible, instead of like just accepting the narrative, try to make a little bit of like a little bit of historical search. We are at this point is like 1901, if I'm not mistaken. So Crowley is 26, and is a mountaineer of some renown. He is incredibly lean. It's not the Buddha that everybody thinks from his photos. He's a young man, incredibly fit and incredibly muscular. On the other side, you have William Butler Yeats, which was a man in his late 40s, very frail and very lean. How do you think something like that actually would have gone if a young man, which is pretty much like a incredibly, like, basically a gym bro, because Crowley was a gym bro, you should see the picture of him young, tries to go against an older man that is really like a more, let's say, the more intellectual type? How do you think it will actually go? But the point is, really, nothing of this happened. In a book by Ellie Rose, The Magicians of the Golden Dawn, you have a witness's account, right, from the time. What really happened there is that, and it's kind of interesting, because what happened there is that Crowley arrives and is blocked at the door. Like, they will not let him in. He had hired a couple of bouncers to come and be his hired muscles on top of him. The problem is, these people were not there because they could not find a place. So Crowley turns and leaves, and that's about it. The funny bit is that a few years later, the bouncers arrive asking for Crowley, and then we're told that they actually, the Crowley had already left. And the comment was like, well, it's good because he never paid us. So that's an interesting story there, right?
Classic Crowley.
Classic Crowley, right? So that's like the Battle of Blythe Road as it's been, if you go online, if you Google the Battle of Blythe Road, it's on if you go on the famous website Atlas Obscura, and you go to 36 Blythe Road, you hear about the Battle of Blythe Road. It never happened. Now, I understand that, there's all this myth that, Crowley bad, Yeats good, and it's great to see like a villain lose, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The reality there is that here we see Crowley being basically a cheap bastard, because at the time was a millionaire. So it was like, also, very boring. There's no eating, unfortunately. But I guess that, you want stories to be interesting and cinematic, and the first version is more cinematic, absolutely. But again, it's also if it ever came to that, I'm pretty sure that the one that was like flying from the stairs would have been William Butler Yeats, not Crowley. Again, like, try and look what Crowley looked like at 26. He was in perfect shape, which is also kind of telling how incredibly out of shape went later in his life. But then again, as an almost 50-year-old man aging disgracefully, which used to be very lean and gym-like, and not anymore, I guess maybe it happens to us all, right? Oh, I don't want to become like Crowley, though. Oh, God.
I suppose he turned up and then went home doesn't make for a very exciting story.
No, absolutely not. But that's exactly what happened. Yeah. It's like that's all about it. So what I haven't been able to listen to that yet. But what story did you know about? Did you know the full battle?
I mean, I've heard of it. You sort of hear different variations, and yeah, as you said, it's kind of gone into the sort of folklore of occultism.
I had
Yep.
to make several stitches on TikTok when I was still on TikTok about that. And of course, you will say, "Oh no, of course, what you Satanist, you would say that because you're defending your masters." Like, yeah, sure, okay, whatever.
I mean, if you're calling Crowley a Satanist, you may as well call Yates one too, because they're all in the same fucking boat
Right?
at this point.
Exactly.
Y'all exercise some criticism here. Oh my god.
I know a lot of people that are very active in Rosicrucian circles. And of course, the Golden Dawn is an extension of the associated Rosicrucian in Anglia. So most people don't realize the Golden Dawn really is esoteric Christianity with an Egyptian mask on top, right?
Right.
And so you have a lot of William Butler Yeats fanboys in those circles, and they what you just said, they would have a stroke. So what do you mean, Yeats Satanist? What are you talking about? Daddy is not a Satanist. Well, I don't know about that. He was definitely lusting after one woman and then after the daughter of the same woman. How about that for a good guy, right? Anyway.
So what you're telling me is none of our occult saints are actually saints, and they're not even really shades of hero. Gotcha.
No, nope. And honestly, for me, when I realized this, for me was so liberating, because you know what? Actually, and maybe I don't know. This speaks about the fact that my own narcissism. When I realized that these people were humans, I was like, well, you know what? I'm a human too. I can do something as well. Like, I don't have to live vicariously through them, which is, again, it's the promise of Christianity. Like, you don't have to do anything. Jesus is doing it for you. It's like, no, I mean, actually, you do something for yourself. You do your own miracles, because you look at these people, like, they were human. They were absolutely like mess of humans, all of them, and look all the things that they've done.
So I guess this is a good time, I think, if we want to switch gears a little bit here, to talk about the relationship between occultists and pagans, and maybe between history and modern interpretations and innovations in the esoteric. We've got them as two separate things, but I actually kind of look at them as kind of two sides of the same coin when I read them. But when we talk about modern occultism, and then we talk about modern neo-paganism, I at least, having studied ceremonial magic for a little bit in my early years, I see a lot of the, once you see the DNA woven into into a lot of the neo-pagan chapters, you start to see it kind of everywhere. But do you have a similar perspective, different perspective? How do you see this?
What is the question exactly? Because I'm. What are you trying to zone in?
What are the relationships between occultism and pagans? Like, is there a tight bond there, or is there more of a, hey, we're kind of like kissing cousins?
I mean, from my perspective, there's almost an absolute identity, in the sense that that's how I grew up. Again, in Rome, in the mid to late 90s, and then early 2000s, there was no real occult scene that was public. The only thing that was easily accessible was the Pagan Pride Day, and that was done every year in September. So that was the first time. That was one of my first, going out and meet other like-minded people, right? And at the time, I did not see myself as a pagan. I never saw myself as a pagan in the way normal pagans see themselves. So I never worshipped any pantheon, even if I have a lot of interest in the Celtic pantheon, especially the Welsh pantheon and the Egyptian pantheon, obviously. But I was never interested in any sort of devotional practice. But at the same time, for me, hanging out as a magician, I always saw myself as a magician, right? But hanging out with pagans was obvious because there was no one else. Like, it was just one big community. At least in Italy, at least in Rome. I ended up, collaborating with the organizers of the Pagan Pride Day, and I was one of the people who was always there, setting up and tearing down, doing classes, doing talks and whatnot about magic. For me, there was just like that, like in the sense that, in fact, the generation of the OTO that I brought into the OTO, but in Italy first, they were all people that I met in the Pagan Pride Day at first, and they were all people that originally identified themselves as pagan Wiccans, right? But it was like not traditional Wicca, so they were like eclectic Wiccans. Again, in Italy, we really didn't have any Gardnerian Alexandrian convents for a very long time. Now, of course, they exist. But so what we had at the time was more like that kind of eclectic witchcraft Wiccan type people, and then all of them eventually, some good chunk of them eventually enter the OTO and like find themselves into Thelema. So for me, I've always seen as like you say, cousin, actually maybe even more than cousin, but like brothers and sisters, really. But I realize that it's my perspective. It's really very different. It's definitely very different in the UK, like wildly different. Here in the UK, in London, as you can imagine, I mean, it's massive, right? The lockdowns and the pandemic, put a hit to that, but in general, it's still very, very big. There's a lot of intersectionality. So for instance, there are a lot of like Wiccans that are also members of the OTO. There's a lot of Wiccans that are also Thelemites. Very, very few heathens that are actually interested in Thelema. There are some. I'm not going to name names, of course, because people want to keep their privacy. But there's actually a very public-facing heathen that also. I mean, he was an OTO member. I don't know if still, but he was definitely interested in Thelema as well. But in general, it's much different here. Like because again, the communities are so in many ways are more evolved than they were in Italy, and they still are in Italy. So possibly, people can actually find their own specific niche. But for me, I see neo-paganism in all its many different aspects. I see it as another. I see it as part of, when I say occultism, right? I see it as an alternative to mainstream religions. And so for me, it's all the same big umbrella. It might be reductive because, of course, I realize that some people are very, very specific about what makes them unique. And I respect that, of course. So I will never say, well, we're all the same. We're obviously not. Like even when we look at practices, like I was hammering the idea that it's important to put the right focus on the magical, mystical aspects of these things we do. So, of course, for instance, my ritual will be vastly different from yours. My theology will be vastly different to yours. Of course, we're not the same, but I feel we're all an alternative to mainstream religion, and that's where I position it ourselves.
Yep, that makes total sense. And your experience of Italy in the 90s sounds very much like when I first became a pagan in the early aughts, because I mean, a lot of those trends were still going on, at least as far as the States go. For the circles that I was traveling in, you could throw a stone and in the same group, it would be a Thelemite, a Luciferian, a Wiccan, and a couple of eclectic pagans, and maybe a heathen. So, I mean, don't throw too many stones. We don't like that, but
No, exactly. I mean, that's what I remember, and in fact, I remember it fondly. In many ways, it was easier times, simpler times, right? But also, in many ways, it was. I had the chance, to speak with people that have different practices and different perspectives. Where right now, I really don't anymore, and I don't see that happening anymore either. Because even online, where it was supposed to become like a place where there's a lot of like intersectionality, people talk to each other. Well, not really. Like everybody talks to themselves. Like I've been trying to see if I like Threads, because I don't like the new Meta Twitter clone, because I really need to get out of Twitter for good. Like it's not good for my mental health staying on that fucking hellhole. But I hate it so much because Twitter was my main. I really loved being on Twitter before Elon Musk. It was really cool. But a lot of shit went down on Twitter, but it was really cool. Anyway, long story short.
Today's episode of Around Grandfather Fire is sponsored by Twitter.
You mean shitter, clearly, because it's
Oh my gosh, the enshittification of that platform has hurt my soul because I
yeah,
followed so many medical professionals that I wouldn't have known anything about otherwise, like psychologists, psychiatrists, like everybody was on fucking Twitter, and I could
yeah,
get more unfiltered
yeah.
content from them.
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
Oh,
It was
I
really
feel
good.
you. I feel you.
It was really good. So anyway, I'm trying to see if Threads is any better. It's kind of
not.
not. It's kind of not. Kind of not.
It
It's,
did.
it's,
But you know,
sorry,
like,
go ahead, Snow.
I was going to say, I was watching something the other day and it made me laugh because it had come up saying Twitter in brackets, formerly known as Twitter. I was like, that's right. We're not calling it anything else. It's still Twitter.
So anyway, what I'm saying, the point I'm making is that like I'm trying Threads and everybody is so like almost like everybody's talking to themselves. Once again, it's like there's witch threads and author threads and Thelema threads, which is just me and other 3 people. And then there's like, this threads. It's like, what's the point? Why people only want to talk to themselves, right? I don't
even think it's a want. I don't think it's a want. I think that a lot of these platforms are intentionally designed to silo people.
Yeah, you're
because
right. Absolutely
right. You can see this in early TikTok because you used hashtag trends to find stuff, but now it's a siloing device.
Yeah,
even
absolutely right.
YouTube Shorts operates this way. I was watching ironically a YouTube short on this. The way that they program is that if you have an audience and you say, send this to my subscribers, what the algorithm does is says, okay, we're only going to send this to your subscribers. We're not going to send this to YouTube Shorts generally. So the author was like, don't check, send this to your subscribers. Your subscribers will find it through the algorithm anyway. And it's like a perfect example of information siloing through YouTube's platform algorithm. I'm glad he figured it out because that was frustrating the hell out of me. But I mean, that's the kind of siloing of
I am.
Yeah, the whole social media landscape.
It's really not good because I guess that if you never speak with people that have different opinions than you, and I'm not saying you should talk to Nazis because you do not talk to Nazis. That's the point. Like, but in general, exactly, you do something else to Nazis. I agree with you 100%. But in general, like you would want to talk to people that have different, maybe, I don't know, to heathens, if I'm a Thelemite, right? Like we're doing tonight.
Right.
But it's impossible to do it on social media anymore because you only get, I mean, I don't get to see anybody because really nobody speaks about Thelema. So I get to see witches. And I say something and people like pile on me, shut up, Crowley bastard, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, what the hell, guys? Okay, come on. It's wild out there, right? So it would be nice if we could find a way to get out of social media, but keeping the connections. It's not going to happen. But
yeah, I mean that's one thing that we're trying to do with the community that we have on our Discord server. It's very, very varied. We have Thelemites, we have heathens, we have Kemeticists, we have even Christo-pagans are in there now, and witches and all different kinds of things. And that's why for this year particularly, we've made such an effort to try and bring in guests from different traditions, different backgrounds, which is why we really appreciate you coming on yourself as a Thelemite.
No, it's been great. Like, it's great discussion, right?
Absolutely. I wanted to ask something because it came up earlier when you were talking about like first editions of different manuals and this, that, and the other, and basically dick measuring contests with piles of books. What is the balance between the history that we can find in these and like modern interpretations and innovations in the esoteric circles? Because I mean, your Magic Without Tears is one of these. So where do you balance the historical weight of the stuff that's come before, like Liber Alva Legis, versus the modern interpretation of, say, Thelema as you're teaching it through your work?
For me, you always have to start with with the original material, right? You cannot do without it, right? So for me, every time I put together a class, of course, there's always, this is what Crowley said, right? This is how Crowley intended it, to the best of my understanding. And thankfully, since for a while I had access to a lot of like more, let's say, private archives and whatnot, I have a lot of material that's not readily available. So I was always able to, present into this classes some reference, right? Okay, this is exactly what Crowley meant. This is what we know. But especially in Thelema, Crowley wrote a lot of stuff, but also did not write a lot of things. Funnily enough, in his practical instructions, like his rituals, some of them are heavily commented, and some of them, there's nothing about it. And I can tell you, there's nothing about it because I know, in the sense that it's not that there's nothing that's been published about it. There's some stuff that, they exist, but it's not been published. But there's also a lot of stuff that just does not exist. Some people think that because it hasn't survived. In the late 60s, in the States, a lot of Crowley material got stolen by a group that was calling itself the Solar Lodge, and these people, when it's a long story, these people were very weird. In a way, they were running a clandestine OTO group. It's to this day, it's the only OTO group that made any money whatsoever. Like at one time, they owned a little town outside in California. And they ended up being raided by the FBI because they had connection. Some say they had connection with Manson family, but they definitely were doing strange culty stuff. So they were raided by the FBI. And what happened there is that instead of they burned everything they had so that nobody would have it. So we know, and the thing is that there was a moment where a big part of Crowley's literally and private estate was in the hands of Carl Germer, which was his direct successor. When he died, the wife of Carl Germer, Sasha Germer, was a very elderly lady, which was not really all there with her mind. Basically, these people got inside their house, stole the stuff, and they went and do their own things. And then when they were raided, they just burned it all. So we think that a lot of stuff has been lost at that point, okay? But long story short, so I think you always have to go back to the source material, and you always have to try and explain at least, why a ritual was made and why an instructions was made, at least at the beginning. But then I think it's also important to make space for evolutions, right? Because again, if you don't do that, that's not a living tradition, right? That's just like you're not doing magic or mysticism or even religion. You're doing historiography, you're doing anthropology, you're doing something else, right? You're just studying something that's dead. Whereby instead, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to push on a living tradition. But then again, every time, even in my first book, there wasn't really anything like this. In the second book I'm writing now, there will be some things else that are going to be like big disclaimers. Like this is Marco Visconti's interpretation of this. And Crowley said this. This is the commentary. And there's, in fact, one thing that I'm discussing. It's like there's no commentary here. And this is my interpretation. Now, I found this to be useful. And my students that tried it found it to be useful. You can decide if you want to use it or not. I think this kind of disclaimer is important. Because the other approach, which is something that happens in Thelema as well, with the books of this guy called J. Daniel Gunther, which is like one of the leader of the AA lineage connected with the OTO. This guy literally says, I'm basically God incarnated, I'm VVV incarnated. Like he doesn't say it publicly, but he says behind closed doors. And so everything he says, like he writes under class A, and class A for Thelemites means basically it's the word of God. I mean, you could do that instead, right? And I find it insanely cringe, right? That's fucking cringe. I will never do that. Even if technically I have the grade, I have the degree, I have the lineage. It's bullshit, right? My point, everything I will say is, I think it's important to evolve the tradition, but I think it has to come with a disclaimer. And the reality there is that when I'm dead, if what I've done has a worth, people maybe will say, you know what, we don't need a disclaimer anymore because enough of us has tested it and it works, and that's going to be it. So, but that's my take on it.
So we've been going for quite a while now, over an hour and a half, I think. Just before we wrap up, I won't be able to sleep tonight if I don't ask you about your music career.
Okay. So what do you want to know?
I mean, apart from saying thank you for being involved with Grendel's House Generation,
Thank you. Well, I
great
should say
album.
we should thank Jos because Jos is the main guy in Grendel. It's been since day one. It still goes hard. I mean, I was seeing his video. It was in Malta the other day. It's still, I don't know. The guy is like a few years younger than me. It still goes like a fucking train. If I would do that right now, all my bones would ache. But you know, good for him. But yeah, I mean, so what I can tell you about my music. So well, I've been a musician. Can I say famous musician to a degree? I mean, I was a name in a very niche scene. Let's put it like that. And I, for a while, between like 99 till 20, last time I did a tour was 2018. So just shy of 20 years. I was a DJ first in Italy. My background in music, I'm a guitar player. I love guitar. I love metal. I'll just give you an idea. Yeah. This is the kind of stuff I like, right? This is what I play. But instead, for many reasons, I was never able to play guitar in a band because possibly, you know, you gotta find like a drummer and a bass player and another guitar player and a singer. What happened at some point that I met with two guys I started going to clubs, late 90s. It was the time when, you know, Nine Inch Nails, Orgy, I don't know, Deftones, all those bands were there, right? And Skinny Puppy and whatnot. And that was the kind of stuff I was listening to. I meet these two people, Marco as well, that's his name, and Paul in Rome. We became friends and we started a band called XP8. This band eventually starts doing something, and we become like the first band, the first, you know, electro-industrial, electro-goth, you want to call it EBM. There's so many names for this genre. We become the main Italian band, so we start touring outside of Italy, and that's where we start going to all the festivals in Europe. We're talking now mid-noughties. That scene was huge at the time. By huge, I mean that even in Italy, there's nothing alternative really in Italy, even to this day. At that time, you would have clubs filled to the brim, like thousands of people every weekend, right? So it was huge. I don't know what happened. In fact, I know what happened. It was a time, you know, before the 2008 financial crash. Everybody had a lot of money. We had a different. We didn't have a World War III like weighing on our head. Everybody wanted to be more hedonistic and have fun. So anyway, long story short, I started going to festivals with XP8 in Germany and in the Netherlands and here in the UK, and I became friend with different musicians, right? And at the time, I was in a position where I could actually basically music was my main breadwinner, right? Because between what I was doing with XP8 and what I was doing with my DJ nights, that was all I needed to do, right? So people were like, hey, are you free to come on tour? Are you free to come and do this and do that? Grendel was the first band that invited me. Like we were in Summer Darkness, a festival in Den Haag, and we were drunk, and the Anita, which at the time was their keyboard player, just quit the band. And so Jos was like, hey, do you want to be the next Grendel keyboard player? And I was like, yeah, sure. It's like, let's go on tour. And we went on tour in Mexico right away. That was really another experience I remember very clearly. So yeah, and then right after that, a year later, again festival, again in the Netherlands. In fact, I meet this other guy called Sammy, and he is the guy in this band called Faderhead. And same thing, like, hey, you want to come? And in fact, I would end up being part of Faderhead for 10 years. We had a lot of fun. Like there is this video on YouTube from this single from Faderhead called When the Freaks Come Out. If you're curious, like look for Faderhead When the Freaks Come Out. It's basically a montage of almost like 6 years of touring. That gives you the idea of what we were doing. It was a lot of fun. And then in 2007, I also got to play with VMV Nation, which is possibly the biggest band in the genre to this day. I only did one tour with them. Let's say we had conflicting viewpoints on many things. For me, it was very important though, because as I said, I'm originally a guitar player, right? But it was listening to a VMV Nation song in 1999, Solitary Signals version, that turned me to this more electronic side of things. So for me, playing with them was an important moment. And since they are such a huge band, and they were already a huge band 20 years ago, we got to play Coachella, like right before the reunion of Rage Against the Machine, which was so loud that completely drowned our stage from their stage, which was very fun. But it was fun. It was fun. Like, we were hanging out in the backstage. Paris Hilton was around. It's so crazy things. Like it was different times. Everybody was having a lot of fun. So yeah, I mean that's my history with industrial music. I quit mostly because I got old. Like the reality there is that when I was living that lifestyle, my diet was 2 bottles of vodka a day and substances of various kinds. And at some point, I was like 20 kilos less than now. But let's say I wasn't healthy. Let's put it like that. So at some point I realized that you just have to say, okay, this has been almost 20 years of my life. It's been great, but I need to do something else now. And that's really what happened, right? In a way, it's also due to the fact that scene had, I was able to really live the entire lifespan of that scene, right? I would say industrial has been going on since the 70s, of course, but that specific, more club-oriented type of industrial really had its beginning in the late 90s, and then it ended mid-2010s, more or less. And so, we started doing gigs for 50 people. We ended up doing gigs for 2,000 people, and then we were back doing gigs for 200 people. And I was like, okay, I quit now before I go back to 50, right? Yeah. But the problem is that like now I'm like 40 something when instead of like being 20, and that just doesn't work anymore. But it's been great. Like honestly, some of my most enduring memories are from those years, right? It's interesting as well because I decided to invest all I had into music after I completed, the ritual for the knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. Right, really, after that summer 1999, when I completed it. By the way, with the pretty much I completed it right around the time of the solar eclipse on the 11th of August 1999. That was like a big message, was like, okay, up until now you've done something with your life. And I had like a life plan of doing something very very typical, right? And I was like, no, you have to do something else. You have to believe into your music dream, and it worked, right? It really it brought me all over the world. I've been all over the world really with music, and it's just like right now, every time I literally used to. There was a moment in my life where I was on a flight every day, at times twice a day. And now if I think about it, it's like, no, I would not survive that, right? Like when we did, like our last North American tour with Federed, it was 22 dates over 24 days. And we were flying we're flying from place to place to place to place. We're like in New York, then in Austin, then we're in Vancouver, then back to Dallas, then back. It was, and the thing is that imagine doing that on 2 bottles of vodka per day and substances. I have videos that will never go online of me being wheeled around, literally being wheeled around when you arrive at the airport, you can request like a chair. Yeah, my tour manager actually said that I had some sort of disability and like wheel me around because I was not able, right? I had no capabilities. So they will wheel me around, and then at some point I will always like regain consciousness and put me on stage, do my hour and a half on stage, and then collapse again. There's some stories there. There's some videos there. Another thing I suggest you to do, I don't know if Sammy still has those on, for a while, if you go like Fader at the US Tour 2011, there's almost like 20 behind the scene videos, but those are the things that you can actually see. There's a lot of things that you cannot see that we never put on. But there's one of me like in a state because I locked myself out of of the door at the hotel. And so, but it's fun. It's the kind of stuff that maybe I shouldn't say on a podcast, but there you go. So,
So
my suggestion is that if your guardian angel tells you to go and be a musician, do it. It's been good for me.
So while all that was ongoing, how was navigating the Thelema and everything else? Or was that all kind of sidelined or?
At that point, I got to a stage in the AA where basically I didn't have I completed my neophyte training at that point, right? Like I became an adept already by the time it started. And what I did is that I did not teach. I did not engage with the community for a long time. I still had like a personal practice, but in many ways, the message there from the guardian angels, like, you have to do this in your life right now, because you do this, you will get the kind of life experience and the success that you need to have in order. In many ways, like, the way I understand it now is that I lived an ultra hedonistic life, so that now in my 40s, I'm almost 50s. In fact, I don't have like that middle-age crisis that a lot of men go through. That out of sudden you have to have all the fun you didn't have when you were young. Because I had all the fun when I was young, right? Like all of it. So right now I'm able to dedicate myself to other things. Not to say that I don't miss it. Of course, I do miss it from time to time. But it's also, I mean, I would not survive it. So that's like
That's fair.
I know that, so everything's good.
So I really appreciate you taking so much time out of your day and your life to explore all these things with us, to explore Thelema, Crowley, and your experience in the music industry and just the intersection of occultism and paganism. I really appreciate you taking all this time, because this has been really fascinating for me as somebody who's been in the community since the early aughts, and for somebody hearing the words of somebody who's been in the community since the 90s and listening to the trends of how you came out of it in Italy in the 90s has been really interesting, because a lot of the trends that you're seeing and that your experience is grounded in are a lot similar to mine here in the States. And I really appreciate that it, not quite, but almost intergenerational perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, it's great to know that, we're all kind of in the similar targeting group, even if we're not all in the same ring at the same time. And it's really neat to hear how the occult scene and how the pagan scenes intermeshing is something that's experienced in more than one context. And it's been really fun to hear your own perspectives on independent Thelemites and Thelema. So I appreciate you bringing all this to the table and being willing to share so much.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So, yeah, if you ever want to do round 2 at some point, I'm more than happy to come back.
That'd be cool.
Definitely. It'd be great to get you back sometime, and hopefully Cabra could be here then as well.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
So, without dragging this out for another hour, as much as I know we could and would love to, can you plug your pluggables?
Of course. Well, you can find me at www.marcovisconti.org. You have basically there is my website with all the relevant links to all my courses, so you can have an idea of what I do. If you're curious about reading more in detail about my courses, it's magic.marcovisconti.org. So a little different URL, but you're there. And I am Marco Visconti pretty much everywhere on social media, either Marco Visconti or Marco Visconti 2393. More or less, if you look for Marco Visconti, you see a bald guy, that's likely me. So, I've been trying to do a little bit more YouTube, but what I found out is that I really hate being in front of camera. Like, I mean, I can do live streams, right? And I can go, and you've seen it, I can talk. But if I have to have a script in front of me and read the script, I just no. So instead, I write the script and I put it on Substack, which is like, so if you're curious about like my writing, and I'm trying to be kind of regular with Substack. And by that, I mean that maybe 1 month I write 1 thing and another month I write 10 things. That's my regularity, right? But in general, That's what I'm doing. So yeah, I'm very easily found, and I'm very happy to chat about Thelema and magic with anybody who's curious about it. So if you listen to this podcast and you have questions, ask away.
So, all right, beautiful people. So now it's time for us to plug our pluggables. Emily, please go ahead.
You can find me at streakingfate.wordpress.com. Go ahead, Snow.
I am at linktree/snowthegoth, and I've changed my blog's address, so that is snowthegoth.com. And as and when I have updates about my presentation on the underworld, I will let people know.
Awesome. And you can find our co-host Cabra at steelcitywitch.wordpress.com or just steelcitywitch.com now. I just redirected. You can also find their awesome content on YouTube. Look for Steel City Witch. And yeah, seriously, their explorations have been really helpful to reifying my own views on a lot of things. So seriously, check their YouTube out. You can also find me at sarinth.wordpress.com. You can find my Patreon and my work if you want a prayer or if you want me to write on the topic. Patreon.com/Sarinth Odinson. And then you can also support us at the Patreon at patreon.com/aroundgrandfatherfire. If you want to join the Discord, you do not have to be a member of the Patreon, but we definitely welcome any support for the show that you want to provide. And that can also include hitting us up on Apple and the various other platforms that we mirror this podcast to. Our main squeeze at this point for this podcast is through Spotify. It used to be called Anchor. So if you guys can leave us reviews there and send us audio clips if you want to ask questions, or you can hit us up on the Discord. And again, I really want to thank you, Marco, for coming on and joining us. And we will see you all next time around the fire.